Hello, booktube. Welcome back to my channel, and it's time for another reading check-in. I have again 3 books this time. I think I'm going to keep up with this pattern of 3 books for each check-in because I think this is kind of manageable for me. And I would say all 3 books I'm going to talk about in this video are kind of nice, and so there ain't gonna be a lot of rants in this video. So if you're expecting that, you might be feeling a little bit disappointed, but if you're not, then yeah, I don't think there's gonna be a lot of ranting this time around, and I think that's great. I love some wonderful reading experience. At least one of these books is a 5-star read, so yeah, I am really happy about that, and I'm really excited to share with you about that particular book. But first, I'm gonna start with this one, The Aerodrome by Rex Warner. And so Margaret Pinard, that's her channel name, she is organizing a readathon this month. It's called May of the Moderns, and my plan for this year is to try to participate in some readathons to just sort of have a little bit of that I would say goal-based reading or something like that, something a bit of a system or whatever, commitment have a little bit of that this year and see how it works. But I don't plan on reading for every single prom of every single readathon that I encounter, just the one that I think I could manage. And so for this readathon, you read a book that is published between 1901 until 1945, and this book was published in 1941, a modern classic. So one of the prompts was read a book that you have had on your shelf for a long time already, TBR veteran, something like that. And this one definitely counted as one. I bought this a while ago, mainly because I was quite enamored by the cover right here. I mean, you can see that there's a fan turbine thingy going on here, and there's actually a plastic sheet, and so you could actually overlay the plastic sheet on the cover, and if you move it, you can see the turbine spinning, but you'll just have to align the sheet real well, and so I think that is really cute. In fact, all of the books in this series is called Vintage Future have that cover. So you'll have different kinds of movements for different covers. I think it's really neat, really wonderful. So yeah, I was like one of those people who cover buy really awesome aesthetics. But anyway, I was also interested in the story of this book. So in here we have a young man named Roy. I think he's about 18 or 19, around that age, and he lives in an English village, and basically in this village nothing much really happens, or at least from how it looks like from the outside, nothing much happens. But as you can see later, this book is one big soap opera. But anyway, from the outside, nothing really significant or remarkable happening in this English village. Everyone just living their lives, chill. They go to the pub, they go to churches, they go to each other's houses or whatever. It's really a rustic, pastoral kind of life, and somewhere at the vicinity near this village is an aerodrome, and the aerodrome is a whole different beast altogether. It houses the Air Force, and basically people who live in the aerodrome, they have to live based on the value that the leadership of the Air Force and the aerodrome has imposed on them. So the lives in the aerodrome is significantly much more different than the village. For one, it is a bit more affluent compared to the village. People there seem to be living a bit more of a upscale kind of life. You know, they seem a bit richer, but then their approach to things such as human relationships, marriage, family, romance are very sterile, very I would say fairly lacking in terms of emotions, because one of the ideas that is sort of championed by the leadership in the Air Force is that these things are not good for the society and therefore do not engage so much on them. You know, do not engage so much on things like, you know, frivolous things like marriage and love or whatever. And from the outside, the Aerodrome looks really remarkable. It's dazzling, it's shiny, and that is something that causes Roy to feel really enamored by it. But at the same time, Roy comes from this village and he feels a certain kind of loyalty to his roots or something like that. But then, and you know, he sort of has this kind of internal conflicts, whether, you know, he wants to, you know, be true to his village roots, or he wants to sort of go to the Aerodrome and live there instead, you know, be part of that lifestyle instead. And so he has this conflict. But then something like a dark secret in his family emerge, and this dark secret, which is really juicy soap opera level stuff, would eventually shake Roy's conviction about where he really stands, and this is where the story really takes off. So from there you can sort of see that there's some kind of a family drama, soapy fiction going on in this book, but at the same time this book is also an allegorical novel about the encroaching influence of fascism. So basically another thing that happens in this book is that the Aerodrome is sort of with its imposing presence, it is starting to exert more and more of its influence on the village. It is beginning to expand its territory, and that is one of the subplots in this book as well. So that somewhat in this story, it's kind of a physical manifestation of how the idea of fascism, which is just kind of like the idea that is really practiced within the confines of the Aerodrome. Basically, you know, the people who live there has to serve the nation, the Aerodrome. You know, basically it's the Aerodrome first. People's needs, personal needs and individuality comes last, and so there's a bit of that fascistic lean on how they govern the people in the Aerodrome, and they intend on spreading that into the village as well. And so another thing is this book sort of explores how a person is influenced by cult-like thinking, because we will eventually see with Roy's his conviction starting to get really shaky, and we would eventually see how a certain influence is starting to work on his mind, and how it sort of shapes his thinking, malleable thinking, more and more as the story progresses. And it's not something that is going to be like really straightforward. There are going to be a lot of like push and pull going on, so it's not like really bland anyway. But I gave this one 3 stars. It wasn't like really spectacular. I like the concepts, but I thought that there are certain aspects of this book that didn't really work for me. For one, it is a allegorical fiction, and so like a lot of other allegorical fiction that I've read, they tend to focus more on the main character, and the side characters tend to be like relegated, not exactly as, you know, real characters, but more like roles that they play within a story. So you have someone who represents the Aerodrome that Roy really looks up to, and then you have some love interest roles played by some female characters, and so we have a lot of these side characters that are kind of one-dimensional, and reading about them is just really flat, kind of boring. At least there are certain side characters that do show some kind of I would say multiple dimensions, at least in how they are portrayed, and I think that's really interesting because they sort of act as foil for Roy later in this book as well. But for the most part, a lot of the way that the story is constructed, it being the allegorical stories, it just didn't really work for me. I'm gonna try more allegorical book anyway. Maybe some of them will work for me, but I don't think that this, like, at least on that part, it didn't really work for me. So, but enough about this. I'm gonna move on to a 5-star read. And this one is Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout. So Olive Again is the second book that is a sequel to Olive Kitteridge, which won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, some time ago. And I really loved that book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I think that this book is even better than the first one. So just like the first book, this book is also a series of interconnected short stories. Not all of them about this character of Olive Kitteridge, who is a somewhat elderly woman living in a fictional town of Crosby in Maine, USA. Some of the stories here, just like the first book, are stories about characters other than Olive Kitteridge. But what really connects all of these stories together is that Olive makes an appearance in all of those stories, whether it's as the main character or as the side character or just a cameo. I read this book as part of the Mental Health May Readathon organized by Marilyn Maya Mendoza and Kim of Middle of the Book March, because I thought that the first book, Olive Kitteridge, really fits the theme as a book that talks about mental health. And after I finished this one, I think it really does fit the theme, because originally I was kind of I have some doubts about that. And what I really love about it is that when it talks about mental health, it doesn't say that, this character has such and such issues, this character has depression, that character has alcoholism, this character has anxiety, whatever. But rather it shows you how the characters look like from what they do, their actions, what they say to people, the things that they have in their minds, their thoughts and stuff, and you surmise what these characters are potentially experiencing in their lives, the kind of hardships they have, the extent of their difficulties from reading about their experience. And I think that is a really wonderful way of writing characters. And I think Elizabeth Strout has this way of writing characters where she just shows you what they're doing, she shows you what they're saying, what they're thinking, and she leaves just the right amount of holes for you to fill out yourself. And as a result, you engage with the book, and at the same time you have a picture that is mostly drawn by the author but also partly drawn by you. And I think that is just really remarkable. Now I'm really interested in reading more of Elizabeth Strout's story and novels. In fact, one of the stories in this book, the last one, makes a reference, a big-ass reference to one of Elizabeth Strout's earlier novels. So there is some kind of shared universe thing going on in this book, and I am a sucker for crossovers. But I thought the way that those mysterious characters are introduced in the last story is really neat. Really love it. I really enjoyed reading this book. I took like 2 days just to finish this book, and that is fast for me because I was so absorbed by this book. So I highly recommend Olive Again and also Olive Kitteridge. You know, just wonderful book. Anyway, so for the third one, so I have this book called Kill the Dog. It is by an author called Alex Storm. So one day the author sent me a message through Instagram asking me if I want to review her book, and I was like, okay. I didn't have much going on at the time, so I was like, okay, and so I accepted, and I got a copy of the book, a free copy of the book sent to me. And I would say this is not something that I usually read, simply because I would say it's slightly of a different genre that I usually read. But I ended up liking this book. It is a self-published book, I think, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So basically what happens in the book is we have this main character named Travis, who is a man struggling to live in LA, and he is a PA. He works as a PA, and he intends to make it big in the film industry. But then again, of course, he's a PA and his working condition is not particularly great. He's working at a place which is really toxic to him as well, and at the same time he has relationship issues. His girlfriend isn't really communicative with him. His girlfriend seems to be quite absent, and between him and his girlfriend there is a dog that seemingly hates him, and this dog seems to be like what this girlfriend mostly focuses on. And so he is quite desperate on getting the attention of his girlfriend back, but he doesn't really know how to do it because he's not very assertive. He's very insecure, and he doesn't know how to sort of get the attention of his girlfriend back. And while all of these is happening, his estranged sister or half sister suddenly comes, enters the picture. Her half sister's name is Nora, and apparently Nora has some kind of, I would say, outlandish background. She is involved with some really absurd thing that I'm not going to get into because I think that is part of the appeal of this book. But basically, his half-sister would eventually try to help him how to get back his girlfriend, or at least that's how the plan seems to look like from the outside. But actually there is something a little bit more deeper than that. So at its core, I would say this book is a bit of a coming-of-age story and also a domestic fiction. And I think you can see, I think you can connect the dots on how this book is going to sort of look like. The coming-of-age part of this book will, of course, focus on the main character Travis, who is a insecure person who lacks self-esteem. And I would say we are going to see some character development going on. And the domestic fiction part, well, yes, Travis and his half-sister. There is something going to be explored on that end as well. This book is not 100% realistic, and by that I mean there are going to be some fantastical elements going on in here. There are going to be some sci-fi elements, some things that aren't exactly like rooted in our reality, so be prepared for that. So I would say there are going to be some really outlandish element going on in here. But I would say the part that I like the most would be, of course, the core of this book and how they really work well with one another. And I think the pacing of this book is really excellent as well. It is consistent, but it is fairly fast-paced all around as well. So I think that part was done quite nicely. And one thing, or a couple of things that I didn't particularly like, is that there are certain footnotes in this book that that feels more like info dumping. Basically, there are going to be some technical terms, especially in the film industry, that I would say average readers might not be familiar with, and a lot of these terms would be explained as footnotes. And I think footnotes, they can sort of break the flow of a story, unless if you use the footnotes in a way that augments the reading experience, playing with the form. That would be interesting. And in addition, there are certain, I would say, pop culture references that are peppered throughout this book, which I think feel a little bit clunky, because sometimes they sort of stand out by themselves, and sometimes it doesn't really make a lot of sense as to why certain pop culture references are employed as metaphors or similes in this book, and they sort of appear just like any other kind of similes that don't mesh really well with the context of the story. But other than that, I think this book is quite nicely written, and I'm quite excited to see more writing by this author. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna talk about in this video. And my phone space is running out, so I'm gonna stop this video now. So yeah, until then, take care. See you in a different video. Take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.